just over 3 weeks ago on May 20th, on what should have been Rachel's 38th birthday. And in a poetic coincidence, or perhaps in Rachel's own divine assistance, our investigators uncovered a lead that led us to this day. And on this day, I'm here to tell you, Rachel's murderer is no longer a free man. Hopefully, he will never have the opportunity to walk free again.
So on one hand, while I had heard of the Rachel Morin case, I'd actually not been following it. I will say, however, that my interest was sparked in the case by another creator called Vicky Marie, and I'll link her channel under this video, as Vicky Marie is covering the Samantha Murphy case and pointed out the similarities between the two cases. So I'm going to give an overview of this case and then discuss the recent arrest of her alleged murderer. I will say, should you wish to have a look at deep dives on this case, it is my understanding that both Grizzly True Crime and Vicky Marie Chats have covered this case quite extensively, and I will link both their channels below. I'm going to preface discussing this case by mentioning that apparently Rachel's oldest daughter, who is now 18 or 19, has recently announced that she is pregnant and having a baby girl. So there's a little bit of positivity there for the family, and I'm sure we all wish for a truly blessed life for that little baby. So on the 5th of August last year, Rachel Morin was 37 years old. She was the mother of 5 children, which makes this case even more devastating, thinking of the family who've lost their beautiful mother. So it appears that she'd been walking on a trail called the Ma and Pa Walking Trail in Bel Air in Maryland, which is where she was last seen. And her vehicle was later found in the car park for that walking trail by police. On the day after she went missing, her body was found in a drainage culvert around 80 yards from the trail. In metric terms, that's about 73 metres. While investigating the case, law enforcement were able to obtain a usable DNA sample of the offender. Having run this, they discovered that the DNA actually matched to a home invasion on the other side of the country in LA in March of that year. There was doorcam footage from that incident in LA which showed the perpetrator as he was leaving the scene. So investigators had DNA of this individual plus video footage of the individual, but at that point in time were unable to identify him. In February of this year, they released sketches of the individual who they were looking for in relation to both these cases. They also, in the meantime, had submitted the DNA to a lab in Baltimore for genetic genealogy matching. And it was from this that in May of this year they were able to identify their suspect. So the suspect's name is Victor Martinez Hernandez, a 23-year-old who had illegally entered the United States, having originally come from El Salvador. He had in fact fled El Salvador after committing a brutal murder in January of 2023. Because of the murder in El Salvador, there's what is called a red notice on him, which is an Interpol warrant for his arrest and return to El Salvador. And I'll get back to that in a minute. So it turns out that this guy has ties to criminal gangs both in the US and in El Salvador. So he's really not a nice person. And it appears that he's been moving around quite a bit in the US since he entered, and even since the death of Rachel Morin. So with law enforcement having discovered his identity, they did have an arrest warrant written up for him. However, the problem was finding him. And of course, with the risk of him fleeing, Law enforcement kept things pretty quiet about having discovered his identity while they were still trying to discover his location. Even once they discovered his location, they informed family members of his impending arrest, but asked them to keep that information private until after the arrest was made, in order to prevent the possibility of his escape. So, most recently, Hernandez was arrested in Tulsa, Oklahoma, on charges relating to trespassing and disorderly conduct. Whilst processing him, officers in Oklahoma identified him and made contact with law enforcement in Maryland. So, on the 15th of this month, law enforcement finally arrested Hernandez on charges of first-degree red rum and Being an illegal immigrant means that law enforcement in Bel Air have had to apply for an ICE hold on him, meaning that he can't be deported back to El Salvador, where there are still charges against him. And while serving any subsequent sentences, law enforcement have said quite emphatically that he will not be deported before answering these charges. They also said that should he ever become free in Maryland, he will then be extradited to Los Angeles to face charges there, before there is any possibility of him being sent back to El Salvador. So, whilst Maryland no longer has a death penalty, in the press conference, law enforcement seemed pretty adamant that he will never get out of jail. Hernandez will be extradited to Maryland as soon as possible, according to law enforcement. This can take 10 days if he chooses not to fight the extradition, or if he does fight it, somewhere between 30 to 60 days. Following the decision of law enforcement not to share his picture on social media, I have instead decided to only briefly show his picture and then subsequently show another picture, which I believe there is a similarity. So, before I finish, I want to address the big question that I think many people have, and this is something that even law enforcement have discussed. They've mentioned that at this point in time they don't know where else he's been within the United States, and they're fearful that there have been other cases since Rachel Morin. So consider this. Before leaving El Salvador, he'd committed a violent murder in January of 2023. Then in August, he went on to do the same to Rachel Morin. That's a 7-month gap between those two crimes. There's now been 10 months since Rachel's murder. Criminologists will tell you that individuals such as these tend to escalate rather than de-escalate, meaning that the likelihood of him having gone 10 months without committing another similar crime is in fact somewhat diminished. Now, law enforcement will make use of any digital devices that he had on him to track his movements over the previous 10 months. And they'll also no doubt be conducting multiple interviews with him, and probably even before he's extradited to Maryland. And they'll also be no doubt looking very closely at his gang associations and known associates and any similar crimes in those areas. I'm going to finish this video just with a reminder that while currently there is plenty of discussion with regards to this monster who's been arrested, let's remember the 2 women whose lives he took and the lives of those people around them who've been changed forever. At least now there's hope for justice for Rachel Morin and for the other lady from El Salvador. Thanks for watching. If you've liked my video, please help me out by clicking the like button, hit subscribe, and leave a comment below.